So we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that.
Hey everyone, my name is Andre Walton. I'm the Southeast Regional Organizer for OWR, and welcome to the Revolution. Today we're speaking to Steven Olikara. Steven is the founder and former CEO of Millennial Action Project. He has also started an exploratory committee considering a possible run for the U.S. Senate. He's obviously in a huge growing field of Democratic candidates, so it should be quite fun. But ultimately, his goal is to face Ron Johnson in the general election. So I'm really excited to have you on, Steven. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the son of Indian immigrants. I grew up in the western Milwaukee suburb of Brookfield, and generally, politics could not have been a more foreign concept when I was growing up. Really, like a good Indian son, I figured I'd go into engineering. But my first passion in life was a completely different discipline, but ultimately became the spark for politics, and that's music. I played in every kind of band you can imagine when I was growing up. I had multiple rock bands. I was playing Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit when I was in 5th grade. Then moved into jazz, funk. I had a James Brown cover band. I had a hip hop band, complete with turntables and breakdance. And that one shocked a lot of people, especially when we went into some of the white suburbs of Wisconsin. But people enjoyed it as well. I had a folk band, a klezmer band for our Jewish audiences who might be tuning in, and many others as well. And what I learned from playing these different genres of music is how it tapped into different subcultures within the greater Milwaukee area. And when I started to realize just how racially segregated Metro Milwaukee is, I found music as the powerful vehicle that could transcend and bridge a lot of these divisions. And I would see that reflected in our bands. Every band was like a motley crew of people across those divides, as well as our audiences. So I learned this basic lesson that when you bring diverse groups of people together in a spirit of inclusion and openness and compassion, the art became better. And I think that principle is true for politics. The politics gets better when you create those kinds of spaces. I became a radio DJ. I'm a proud UW Badger. I'm a proud first environmental studies major to graduate from UW. And on top of that, after graduating, I launched the Millennial Action Project with a mission to transform our political culture. I generally don't believe we have a lane in politics to solve the scale of the problems that we have. And you see young people in particular becoming disillusioned with politics, the status quo kind of politics. So our whole job was to work with young leaders getting involved in politics, build diverse coalitions, and get legislation over the finish line on issues from criminal justice reform to clean energy to gun violence prevention. And now the idea with exploring the U.S. Senate race in Wisconsin is to take that work to a new level of consciousness. It's what Martin Luther King III, who did a training program with our leaders, he called on us to build a higher order of politics. And he said, you got to bring that to a larger audience. So that's our mission right now, is to call Wisconsinites to a higher order of politics. And so far, the response has been incredible, including when you and I met Andre in Sheboygan. Just great energy, and I think people are starting to pay attention to what we're doing.
Yeah, most definitely. I definitely know what you mean about that diversity situation because I partially grew up in Seattle. I lived there for about 8 years, and when I came back to Milwaukee, I was extremely surprised about the segregation. So it's amazing that you've worked to, kind of break that down a little bit. So so running for the U.S. Senate is a huge decision, and obviously you started an exploratory committee. What made you decide to do that?
The biggest thing is listening. When I was a jazz musician, my instructor on the first day of jazz camp, he said, put away your instruments. The most important skill in jazz is listening. So we listened to John Coltrane and Miles Davis and all the greats. I think the number one skill in politics, the number one skill for a U.S. senator is listening as well. And so as a new candidate, who's worked on a lot of these issues. I always remind people I have the most federal legislative experience, despite being the new candidate. To me, it was really important to listen with a lot of humility. This is not an ego-driven campaign that says, top down, we're going to tell you what the solutions are. No, I actually think a simple but radical idea that we're championing in this campaign is that the people who've been most marginalized, most disillusioned, who are closest to the issues, yeah, they should be the ones who are driving our agenda, not the other way around. And the exploratory committee was the most authentic way to do that, and also invite people to be part of this from the grassroots level. Again, we're not going to be Washington's preferred candidate. We're going to be a candidate that's speaking up for people who've been left out. And so that's been our approach so far. And now we've brought on hundreds of volunteers to this campaign, and that's the kind of politics I believe in. So that's why we've done it this way.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to see what comes out of it. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into some policy questions. This is always my favorite part. I'm kind of like a policy wonk. So
Nice.
hopefully people who listen are too. But so obviously one of the biggest issues that our generation is going to have to face is obviously climate change. Experts have estimated that we have less than 12 years to seriously address climate change before we have irreversible damage. And I would argue we are already crossed that point, but experts have different opinions and studies about that. Yet we see little to no action when it fully comes to addressing climate change, when it comes to Congress and Senate. What do you think is the best way to, well first, what do you think we should do to address climate change? And I guess, what do you think is the best way to bring it back to the forefront of the Senate?
Absolutely. So the theme of our entire agenda is dignity and opportunity for all. And so every issue, you're going to hear me go back to this dignity theme. And that applies to climate change because it is the height of indignities that our generation, who hasn't made the decisions to come into this mess, might have to inherit a climate catastrophe and an unstable planet to live on. And the issue of climate change has a personal calling of mine since I was in high school. And I've joked consistently, but also half serious, over the last 10 years, you talk to anyone who's been on my staff, that if we're able to pass a climate bill that addresses the scale of the problem, I will probably step down from politics and become a professional musician. Like, that is my drop the mic moment. And that's very much a mission of mine. And so to your question, how do we bring this to the U.S. Senate and what are some solutions? So I used to work in the environmental space before founding Millennial Action Project. And part of what I realized is because of our democracy being so broken, a lot of common sense climate solutions were not getting votes and they were not getting enough support. And so we built a coalition of young members of Congress to expand clean energy funding for new technologies. It was a program that was on the chopping block called ARPA-E within the Department of Energy. We not only saved it, but also expanded the funding for that. So I remember being in the room when that decision happened for everyone to sign on to this letter, thinking to myself, yeah, the college version of me when I was at UW-Madison, this is exactly what I envisioned myself doing. It was a very full circle moment. So now as we think about the U.S. Senate, how do we take this momentum to the next level? And I just want to highlight, we've not only gotten Democrats, but also independents and Republicans, generally millennials, on board with a lot of these ideas. And so the number one thing we have to do is take that R&D funding and probably double it or triple it. So massively increase basic science and research that only the government can invest in. And then there are great options to commercialize it in the private sector and empower those clean energy entrepreneurs. Wisconsin would be a huge beneficiary of that because we have one of the best, not only universities, but tech transfer offices that allows entrepreneurs to champion these new technologies. So that's number one. The second thing is the deployment of these technologies. So it's not enough just to come up with the breakthrough solar panel, but you also need incentives to take it into the field. And so what I would do is end immediately all the subsidies for the carbon-based economy with oil and coal. I mean, our government should be on the side of the problem solvers, not people who are putting pollution into the atmosphere. and bring those incentives to fund tax credits and other incentives for cleaner technologies, and allow entrepreneurs to find the best solutions. The government doesn't have to dictate, like, this is the specific prescription for a new wind technology. No, let entrepreneurs figure out the best ways of doing it, but just make sure the incentives are on the side of humanity as opposed to polluting our planet. And then the final opportunity I've seen, especially as I've talked with people on our Dignity tour across Wisconsin, is there are opportunities for carbon credits and funding for unlikely constituency groups, like farmers, for example, can be part of carbon absorbing crops in agriculture. So we can have people in red parts of our state getting paid to take on climate change. So I think we need to explore the pricing, the whole pricing infrastructure we have around people who are polluting and then people who are taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Again, get the rewards to those people who may not be, sitting, dwelling entrepreneurs. I'm sure they'll do some great things, but we're talking about, people who are multi-generational farmers in western Wisconsin who are looking for new revenue. So those are some of the opportunities I've seen, and Wisconsinites have really gone behind as we've been talking with them.
Awesome. Yeah, I think what's nice about what you just said is you got to kind of get creative. A lot of times, especially with politicians, they say, hey, we got to go to green, technology, but we have no actual transition plan for those who, may work in coal or something like that. So I think that's a really good idea. But I think one of the issues with, bringing climate change to the forefront is not that, and I would say Republicans as well, I don't think that they truly believe that it's not real. But the real issue of the reason why they don't want to address it is because they obviously have a campaign finance incentive to go against it. For example, exactly. The oil industry donates heavily to the Republican Party, and in return, they completely act like climate change isn't a real thing, or they deny it. And I think climate or campaign finance is really the evil under all of our politics, and until we actually address that, we won't actually see any change. So one of my questions for you is, how do you think we should address campaign finance law in the United States, and how do you think that would have a ramification for actually passing progressive policy?
This would be the number one issue. But just as you were saying that, Andre, you inspired just a couple more things I got to mention on climate, which is, first of all, I call this solution the 100% solution because that's the frame we need. We need a 100% solution, likely in the next 12 years, as you referenced. And if you look this up, there's a book called The 100% Solution, published by a good friend of mine, that I think offers a really good framework for taking on this generational threat of climate change. And the second thing I'll just mention is that we need to get people into the right frame of mind. And like you said, the vast majority of members of Congress right now believe climate change is real. And this is a generational issue. This is why I'm actually more optimistic than most people I talk to, because even a majority of millennial Republicans under the age of 50, believe climate is real and we need to take action. So you talk to your millennial friends, even if they're conservatives or independents, they believe we need to do something on this. So we need leaders who are willing to seize those opportunities, bring that coalition together. It's not a left versus right issue, but a future versus the past issue. And that's the kind of leadership I'd bring. Moving to campaign finance reform, I've been talking about this across Wisconsin as the number one issue, getting big money out of politics. And people are really fired up about this. The space that I'm coming from, which is the clean government, good government space, there's this thinking for a long time that you can't mobilize people on what they call process issues. I'm finding that is wrong. People are smart enough to know that money is at the root of a corrupt and broken system. And that's why you have popular issues on climate change, for example, that are not moving. And so I think I'll make the commitment that this is the number one issue that I would work on if I am in the U.S. Senate. It was something that Bernie, I remember, said during his 2016 campaign. I'll never forget when someone asked him, what would be your number one piece of legislation, and he said 3 words: campaign finance reform. So I'm a true believer in that. And there are 3 reasons why. First, we need a more honest politics. You have the biggest corporations funding legislation, and it's sometimes done in the least visible ways. Like, the worst corruption I've seen are these little giveaways that they'll carve out in legislation that is too arcane for the general public to even pick up on. And so that's happening regularly, and it erodes at the trust in our government. And anyone who is not an incumbent corporate interest loses out in that system. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur, clean energy entrepreneur, anyone, if you're a student who's not able to declare bankruptcy on your student debt, anyone who's a non-incumbent interest loses out in that system. So we have to flip that on its head. The second thing is members of Congress, I think, should be doing their job. This is a very radical idea I have. Members of Congress should spend their work week doing their job legislating. And here's the messy truth for everyone to understand. If you're in a competitive seat, most members of Congress are spending a majority of their time raising money. And for example, here's a reason for that. There is a price to pay to get on certain committees. If you want to be on the Foreign Relations Committee or the Financial Services Committee, you have to pay member dues to the party committees just to get on some of those assignments. What about your policy expertise or your background or your experience? Nope, not as important as how much money you're raising. So we got to absolutely change that. The Democrats themselves can decide tomorrow. We're going to change our committee assignment process, but we got to make it so that members of Congress are not spending a majority of their time raising money and instead are doing legislating, which is the job we're hiring our leaders to do. Here's the final reason. I've seen up close through my last job working with 2,000 elected officials and now going through the electoral process more personally. Our electoral system is hilariously unequal. It's so bad, it's hilarious. And let me give you some examples of this. First of all, we're asking these candidates to become telemarketers, essentially, spending all their days dialing for dollars, as opposed to doing what I think is most important, which is listening to people who've been disenfranchised and left out. But it gets even worse than that, because if you're a self-funding billionaire, you can put any amount of money into your own campaign. Meanwhile, normal people who are raising money in small increments have to spend a lot more time just getting a basic budget to run their campaign. But it gets even worse than that, and this is where it's hilarious. Like, it's so bad it's funny. I hope we can laugh at this. Right now, let's look at our U.S. Senate race. If you're a new candidate who doesn't currently serve in, say, government office, or you're not, like, a personally wealthy person, you have to go more than a year without making an income. Think about that. Right? We asked our campaign lawyers, as someone who is not personally wealthy, I have worked in the nonprofit field, I'm not a sitting government office holder. They said the soonest I can go on the campaign payroll is June of next year. Think about that. Most people in America can't afford an unexpected car payment, much less going a year without making an income. And so when we talk about representing the working class, it's not just about getting the issues on the agenda. It's making sure the working class can be those office holders, can be those agenda setters. So we need to radically change our campaign finance system so more ordinary people and working class people are able to run for office. So those would be my 3 main priorities with the reform.
Yeah, I think it's one of those issues that people don't understand because it's not discussed as much. But when you kind of break it down, everybody, whether they're left or right, is like, yeah, we need to change that because it's just so egregious. Like, whenever, like somebody like Jeff Bezos can like just buy off a whole party, it's like, that's just not a system where you have a functioning democracy. It's straight up an oligarchy at that point.
Through my last work, have engaged directly with a lot of young elected officials across the country who are having young families, and I know people who have taken out a second mortgage on their home just to be in public service. I know people who have logged hours between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. at their law firm just so they can generate a little bit of income. Or often what I see, and I'm just speaking the truth here as I see it, a lot of times they have very wealthy spouses who are able to help subsidize their work in public service. And so my point with this is we need more ordinary people, more working class people who are able to run for office. And that's one of the many reasons we need to change our campaign finance system. So it's more honest. So we change the leadership pipeline. And so our elected officials spend their time doing their job legislating as opposed to becoming telemarketers.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely agree with you there. It needs to be addressed, and that's the only way we're going to actually have some semblance of a democracy. Is if we address campaign finance reform. So one of the biggest issues that continuously to pull extremely high on voters issues is healthcare. And I think COVID-19 really kind of exposed the deficiencies in our healthcare system, because as people lost their jobs, they also lost their health insurance, and maybe they tried to, you know, get something caught up with different health insurance situations, but it's really hard if you're not getting it through your employer. And we're the only industrialized nation on earth right now that doesn't have a universal form of healthcare system. And there's different forms of it, but we don't have any semblance of it at this point. So it's no secret that OWR is like big supporters of Medicare for all. What is your stance on Medicare for all? And what would you like to see fixed in our healthcare system?
Yeah, so I'm looking to completely reframe the healthcare conversation, because just like we're talking about with campaign finance, the financial incentives are not geared towards health. They're geared towards profits. They're geared towards volume of care as opposed to preventing healthcare issues. And so I look at these problems as a system. Why are we getting such perverted outcomes? We spend the most money on healthcare by far in the world, and we're not the healthiest. We're certainly not even in the top 10. And so one thing I've been doing is listening to Wisconsinites who are dealing directly with healthcare access issues and coming up with the fresh way of talking about it. And here are a couple takeaways I've had. One is healthcare should be a human right in our country, and it's a driver of entrepreneurship and happiness and a more dignified form of work. And here's what I mean by that. Like, first of all, on a moral level, we can't have people in the most wealthiest country in human history going without healthcare. That is wrong morally on many levels. But also, I want to add something to this conversation, because I have been an entrepreneur. I've been in the shoes of someone who has to wonder, okay, if I jump into this new venture, what's going to happen to my benefits in healthcare? You know, one of the biggest problems we have in how we measure our country's success is we talk about GDP. GDP is a very narrow measure of economic output. We need to be measuring happiness, fulfillment, dignity in people's work. And so I want to be able to allow people to take risks on new opportunities, jump into that new venture, try that new business, become a musician, do what makes you fulfilled. And if we have a more portable form of benefits and we're able to guarantee healthcare for every American, then many more people like myself will be able to take that big leap of faith and truly pursue their passions. So there are a few things I would highlight when we think about reform, and I've been getting input through our listening events across Wisconsin on these ideas. So first of all, we want to make sure that we're incentivizing health. And right now, the healthcare system gets rewarded for volume of care. And so there are a lot of interesting solutions out there to reduce the healthcare inflation that's run away over the last 30 years, where, for example, doctors are getting fixed salaries, that hospitals are set up as nonprofits, that doctors, they're not getting rewarded for just giving more care. They actually get rewarded for keeping people healthy. Second big thing is guaranteeing healthcare for everyone. And I think one of the best ways to do that is there is basically a government sanctioned nonprofit entity that becomes available to everyone. So if I'm starting my new company or my organization like I was about 8 years ago, I know I'm still going to have healthcare. And as part of that, I want to include, retirement benefits and, dental and vision and all, like your benefits should basically stay with you even when you're jumping from one thing to the next. Otherwise, I've been talking to people all the time here in Wisconsin who feel like they've been slaves to their longtime employers and they can't afford to leave because they would lose benefits, not just for themselves, but also for their family, which could be devastating. And the final big thing is right now, and it all goes back to campaign finance, but right now, Medicare is not allowed to negotiate with drug companies. Canada, they're able to do it there, in many other countries. That makes no sense. We need to reduce prescription drug costs, allow Medicare to negotiate as one of the largest health insurers. And the only reason why that doesn't happen is because the drug companies and these big pharma companies are controlling our politics right now. And the final thing I'll say is we need to be able to modernize our healthcare system as well. Telemedicine during the pandemic became such an important solution for a lot of people in rural communities. So when I look at healthcare, just like I look at many other issues, I'm looking at what's the root problem right now. And I'm looking at why are we incentivizing the wrong behavior? And then how do we make people feel fulfilled and happy and secure? I think that's how we create a more dignified healthcare system.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good point that I feel like having a guaranteed healthcare really equals more freedom, right? Republicans love to say we need more freedom, we need more freedom. Well, there's nothing more that gives you freedom knowing that you have healthcare at all points. And that gives, especially people our age to take more risks. We might want to start a business. We might want to go out and try something that we actually care about. So I think that's why, having a universal healthcare system is so important. And so, yeah, really good point that you brought up there. Kind of continue to talk about business since we brought that up. So one of the issues that's been really discussed continuing now since COVID is that there has been a labor shortage. And we've seen, in different businesses, when they raise their minimum wage, more people are going to those businesses compared to places that haven't raised their minimum wage. And from like articles that I read, I don't have like multiple data on this, but many people are saying that the reason why they don't want to go back to those jobs is because they don't offer enough benefits, enough pay. They don't feel like their employers cared about them through the pandemic, and it really exposed kind of what businesses think about low wage workers. So I guess it's another two-part question. So are you in favor of increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour? And what do you think is the best way to incentivize? Because obviously right now we have a really weird Senate where almost nothing gets done. But what do you think is one way to incentivize businesses to increase their wages and show that it actually is a benefit to businesses and not necessarily a hurdle?
It sounds like you've been doing the same thing we've been doing, Andre, which is truly listening to people, hearing what are employers saying, what are workers saying, and you totally nailed it. One of the big issues, I mean, when I talk to major manufacturing employers or I was speaking with the owner of a Mexican restaurant in Delavan recently. They're really having trouble hiring and finding workers, and they want to be able to pay their workers more. And so I think the new conversation we need to have on this is, first of all, just like we're talking about in healthcare, workers should lead dignified lives. And in the wealthiest country in the world, we should be able to provide that. And so that does involve raising the minimum wage. And I think $15 an hour is actually a great start, but actually we should go even further in the sense that $15 an hour in New York City is completely different than $15 in Delavan, Wisconsin. So I think the minimum wage should be indexed to two things. One is price purchasing power. And then the second thing is inflation. So we're not relitigating this issue every few years. I think just the minimum wage should go up as inflation goes up accordingly. Now, here's the other thing, because I do talk to small business owners, like this owner of a Mexican restaurant. She was telling me, I have mostly family members working for us because we're just barely getting by, and we're just breaking even. And so one other way we need to sort of index the minimum wage is to consider that a small business owner, like a restaurant that has maybe 10 employees, is completely different than Walmart. I mean, you've seen employers like Walmart or Amazon, they'll say, yeah, we're going to $15 an hour. Well, yeah, that's nice, but also they're trying to take out their small business competitors that can't afford to do that. And so when I talk with small business owners, I think one of the solutions we've been trying to come up with is, can the government also provide a tax credit or some kind of incentive to help especially small business owners? I would say employers likely under the level of 50 employees, really help them, and entrepreneurs as well, be able to have an on-ramp for their minimum wage to rise up. Because if it happens immediately and they have no support, like some of these restaurants, they can't take that on. If you have a glide path and you provide some government incentives tailored to small business, again, Walmart, they don't need it. Mexican restaurant in Delvin, they do need it. Then I think that's one solution for small business to be able to absorb the increase in human capital costs.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. I think I've seen some articles maybe in Australia or something. They have like tax subsidies for small businesses so that they can increase their minimum wage. So they help the small businesses out. And I know we can do it because we give billions of subsidies to corporations all the time. It's just a matter of actually, supporting small businesses. And I think that would help level the playing field because, getting that kind of sticker shock is a real thing. And I think it will have like a trickle down effect. So like if people are getting a $15 minimum wage, maybe more people go and eat at that restaurant. So it would help out small businesses if we find a way to raise all tides. I just have one more question for you, and then if there's anything else you want to talk about, we can talk about it. But obviously, one of the biggest issues, at least for like when it comes to crime and criminalization, is marijuana. And if you live in one county in Wisconsin, you're going to get punished harder if you live in another. And we're talking about like Milwaukee or Ozaukee County. The punishment for having a marijuana charge is usually much harsher if you live in Milwaukee. Are you in favor of legalizing marijuana? And if so, why do you think it's important to do that?
Yeah, 100% legalization, decriminalization, because they call this the war on drugs. But let me break this down a little bit. Let me give the example. My campaign manager is someone who was incarcerated for possession of marijuana. And he went on to work for the Obama campaign, work in the White House on drug policy issues, did a number of amazing things in human rights, and now is my campaign manager. And talking with him, as well as a lot of my friends who've been incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses, is such a poor use of resources. So that's why I do full legalization, because marijuana has, first of all, a positive impact for a number of people who need it for health reasons, but also it should be regulated roughly how we regulate alcohol, and that's how we can bring this industry fully into the light and not punish people for possession of marijuana. And the second thing is, when you look at, this is why I believe there's a huge opportunity to unite left and right on this issue, and my organization already has on these issues, is because incarcerating millions of people like we do in this country, we're the highest incarceration per capita in the world, is a terrible use of public dollars. It's so expensive. It's usually the second or third most expensive budget item in a state, and the federal government is spending a ton of money on federal prisons. So let's make the fiscal conservatism argument to reduce the size of our prison population. And yes, we are able to bring conservatives and libertarians on board with progressives who want to say that our criminal justice system is unequal, disproportionately affecting Black and brown people, and they should be not only released, especially for nonviolent offenses, but also we should expunge their criminal records as well. And I'll just close with this quick story. Our first event here in Milwaukee was with formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs, and there's a woman who was sharing the story of getting her printing business off the ground. And she had the indignity of checking the ex-felon box when she was trying to get investment. And she was talking about how that not only limited her financing options, but it also affected her mind and her self-esteem, her sense of self-confidence. So we need criminal justice reform to make sure that people are truly able to have a second chance when they come out of the justice system. And the unique style of leadership that we're trying to bring to bear is to say, not only these issues are important, but we're going to build the coalition of Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, progressives, bring Bernie organizers together with libertarians, and under one coalition, pass reform. That's how the First Step Act got passed a couple of years ago. A number of our members were involved. That's how we're going to get to the second step, and so on.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's one thing we need to really address in the United States. I think once you are labeled as, a felon, that kind of label never really passes. It's always going to stick to you. But if they did the time and they reform, why not bring them back into society? So that's definitely something that needs to be addressed. So yeah, I asked you all my questions. Was there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to talk about?
Well, it's just going to give a shout out on this topic of providing dignity and humanity and an opportunity for the formerly incarcerated community. I'm really proud to serve on the board of an amazing organization called The Community in Milwaukee that helps change the narrative, like you were saying, Andre, and provide those opportunities for re-entry and what they call pre-entry as well, like just before you're released. So truly people are able to get back on their feet. So I encourage everyone to check out that organization. It's called The Community. Very honored to serve on that board and be part of that work for a long time. And check out a movie I would highly recommend people watch. It's called Just Mercy, about the real life story of Bryan Stevenson. My organization was very proud to be one of the partners of Just Mercy. We got a major grant from them to translate the issues from the movie into real life legislative change. And we've already done it. We've passed reforms to get rid of these mandatory minimum sentences on different crimes, to provide basic health care for women who are in prison, and some basic services that they need. And so we've been pushing these reforms, and a lot of it's captured in this great movie, Just Mercy. Bryan Stevenson's work is amazing. That's really my main inspiration for my work on the criminal justice system.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good movie. I would suggest it as well. But yeah, if people are interested in, learning more about your campaign or possibly donating or finding you on social media, where can people find you?
Yeah, definitely. So check us out at StevenOlikara.com. Hopefully we can put that in this description for the video. And please reach out. I'm on social media at Steven Olikara. And this is a people-powered movement. We're not going after the establishment sources of support. So we really do need this community to donate what they can. Small dollar operation is what we're going for. And we want to build this inclusive, dignified movement for our politics. And if we do that, I'm confident we're going to change the politics of our state, and we'll take a coalition to the U.S. Senate that actually solves climate change, that actually provides a better future for students, that actually takes on the issue of money in politics. That's been my experience, and we need your support to help us do it. So thank you.
Awesome. Everybody go and check out his campaign. We need to support grassroots candidates, and if you like them, go and donate to them. All right, guys, thanks for checking in, and thanks for doing this interview, Steve.
Thank you. It's an honor.
So we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am